Brian May in particular, and of course he made that guitar out of the fireplace. I tried making one out of my mum and dad's chimney. Didn't go as well.
It was a bit heavy, wasn't it?
The Brahms Liszt podcast with Robbie Calvo and Rob Garland.
Welcome to another episode of Brahms and Liszt with me, Rob Garland, and him,
Robbie Calvo.
The topic for today is G.A.S. helping or hindering your progress on the guitar? And let's be clear, when we say G.A.S., we're talking about gear acquisition syndrome, which many guitar players know about. Are you glad I made that distinction? If you're just trying to play a chord and you just start blowing off.
Blowing off is not used here, is it, in the States?
No, it should be, though.
That's an English term, yeah.
It's such a good one, isn't it?
And no, I think that's a brilliant topic because, you know, I think we've all gone through that thing. Oh my God, you know, I want the Mezza Boogie, or I want this amp or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've done a million of those acquisitions myself. The guitar that.
So you're saying you've had a little gas yourself.
I've had a lot of gas, in the past. Yeah, you know, the amplifier that didn't really work for you, and the pedals and the guitars and everything else. I understand why people do, because as men, we're very visually stimulated. So if you see a pedal and it's brightly colored with graphics and lights and everything's flashing away, guys just go, oh my God, that looks incredible. I need that, right? It's like having a Ferrari, you know, that you can only drive 30 miles an hour. So to me, it's like, I think we're all searching as well for that panacea. And I think what I've noticed as an educator over the years is, when we were younger, we would sit in our bedrooms and practice for hours and hours and hours through the crappiest amp that we could afford, right? On a crappy guitar that was always going out of tune. And we developed a skill set based around what we had. Potentially what is happening these days is that we don't want to put in as much effort. We just want the panacea. We want the pedal that's going to make us amazing, because we hear someone else demo it and it sounds amazing. And we want that immediate gratification that our playing's going to get better just because we bought that pedal or that guitar or whatever. Your skill sets just transfer through that, right?
It's a bit like to your Ferrari point, it's a bit like thinking if you buy a Ferrari, you're going to be able to drive like Michael Schumacher immediately. Right. Whereas in actual fact, you're going to have a problem with the shifting and you won't make it to the first corner.
But one of the things I noticed when I started working with Line 6 on Helix and HX Stomp and Pod Go, I started selling presets because a lot of guys were saying, well, I can't get a good sound out of it. I can't program the this, that, and the other, right? So you've bought this amazing piece of gear that you don't necessarily have the time, patience, skills, or whatever to dial in, right, to make it sound good. So then you've got this acquisition that didn't really get you anywhere. But then there's also that paralysis of, oh, there's 150 amps in there. Well, I don't know about you, but I think it was a day later after getting Helix, I sent a video back to Matt at Line 6, and I said, oh, here's my first demo video of Helix, right? Yeah. He said, that didn't take you too long. And I said, well, I just thought it was logical. It was like a smartphone, and then you're setting up a signal chain. But then years later, he said to me, have you tried out the new Grammatico and this other amp in there and stuff? And I said, no. Yeah. I'm still using the AC15, my first presets. And he said, really? And I said, once I dial it in and get the sound I want, I'm done.
Yeah.
I don't mess with too much. I want a guitar tone that represents me. I don't want whirling, spinning sounds that, you know, sound like an alien.
Stalactites. The stalactite reverb.
No. Well, it's all that stuff in it.
I always wonder why. I mean, the same thing with the Fractal. I always wonder why there's at least 70 sounds that nobody on Earth would ever use. You know,
but an alien might.
An alien might, yeah.
Right, yeah. True, but that's my point. But it's there to show what a piece of gear can do at the outer limits of it.
Sure. And they have to fill up those presets too, frankly. It's more attractive if they can sell it saying contains 500 presets than if it contains 4. However, I would only use 4.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I think that's the thing. But that paralysis happens where guys are now going, well, I wonder if does that amp sound better than that? And I'm like, honestly, when I listen to them, they all sound the same.
Yeah.
They sound like digital amplifiers.
Yes.
But if you program it correctly, with your signal chain and the way you like to do things, you can make it sound like the most amazing rig. But I think what happens to a lot of guys is you've got all these too many options.
Yeah. Don't
really know which one sounds better than the other, perhaps.
I did a session a couple of weeks ago at Lemon Tree Studios, and I walked in there. And the last time I was there, they had a lovely old Victoria amp that I used. It sounded beautiful. And this time they changed their setup a little bit, and the guy said, we're using a Kemper now. Now, I've used a Kemper once before when I did Bad Robot sessions, but it's been a long time, and I'm quite familiar with the Fractal menu system. I'm not familiar with the Kemper one at all. And I bought a nice overdrive pedal with me because I thought I was going to be using the Victoria amp, which is sort of a clean bass. So rather than spend, and this was a live band session, there wasn't a lot of time. We had a chart we were going to record, and that was that. It sounded fine, and again, as soon as you start playing, you're reacting to the room. You're changing your tone and volume. You're changing, that's where the tone really comes from.
With that, and you've also got to remember, here's what a lot of people do is they'll pull up a sound and they go, oh, I created this monstrous sound. And they go, yeah, what does it sound like in the band?
Yeah, what's it going to sound like in a mix? Exactly.
In a mix.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing, is it's create a guitar sound that represents you, sits well in the mix, or can be EQ'd either way, right? If you want it thinner, or you're using your pickups to get that thinner rock sound or whatever. If you want a bluesy lead, well, then maybe you're going to the neck or, in betweens. And I think for me, it's like, okay, understand what you want that piece of gear for. You can have the G.A.S, right, all you want. I'm wanting this and I'm wanting that and everything else. But I know people that have got like a Mesa Boogie, dual rectifier, and, they're not using what maybe you would use that amp for. They just like the way it looked. And
coffee table.
It's to a large degree. And I mean, I've got a coffee table over there. I've got my tea on. Right?
Does it have any valves in it?
Yeah. It's a coffee table with valves in it. Tubes.
Tubes for the US market. It depends what you want to do, right? If you are a bedroom player and you get together once a month to play with some friends, and that's it, and that's totally fine, but you have disposable income and you have some time and you want to go on gear forums and watch YouTube videos other than this one, about gear reviews and listen to pedals, then that's fine. Not going to say don't do it. But if you are seriously trying to develop on the instrument and you have 20 minutes at the end of the day to play, and you spend 18 of those minutes on Sweetwater or one of those other sites, then you're not doing yourselves any favors at all. Sometimes I think it's an easier path. It's a bit like people going on social media. It's an easier thing to do than to actually just pick up the guitar and dig in, after a long day.
Well, I think that was kind of, I didn't really qualify my point on that, and I think you just have, is that we've got this gear, and instead of us practicing an arpeggio or a solo or using area or learning the fretboard, we're running through menus and programming things, or turning, tweaking the knobs, being a knob tweaker. You're spending more time trying to get the sound that you're looking for. You're chasing the sound,
right?
But actually understanding really the sound is in your hands, in your fingers, in your technique, in the guitar. These are all conduits to those things, right? But I think it's really cool that we can aspire to better things. I mean, there's a couple of guitars that I would really, really love. Do I need another guitar? No.
Right.
If anything, I need to get rid of a bunch, which I've done. And I think it's boiling down to, what do I need this for? Am I using it? So what I do is like, well, have I played that guitar in the last year?
Right. It's like, have you worn that tartan skirt in your cupboard.
Well, the answer
if you've worn it in the last 2 years, you're going to keep it. If you haven't, get rid of it. You know, get rid of it. Get yourself a little leotard instead. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You know, I actually witnessed it firsthand with Eric Johnson, where he plugged into a little Fender Princeton, and he starts playing, and you're like, oh, sounds just like Eric Johnson, right? He didn't have, you know, 3 massive amps. He had a little Fender Princeton on clean, and it sounded like Eric Johnson. So, you know, there's this disconnect with people sometimes where they really think, if I buy this piece of gear by this artist, I'm going to sound like this artist. And we've all done it. I had a little bit of that when I was younger as well, and I bought a signature model, and, you know, but ultimately, here's the thing that people don't realize about that is, right, those players have spent years working on their craft. Now, yes, they do own very nice gear. And what does that gear really do at that point? To me, it gives them more dynamic range. It gives them a sweeter sound. It gives them this and that, right? But you could still listen to, for example, Eric Johnson through a Princeton, and all of those trademark sounds are right there coming through that little amp, right? So what we got to somehow think about why people get caught up in this sort of loop of, if I buy this, I'll sound like that. And usually what happens is they have buyer's remorse. They obsess about this gear. They buy it, it arrives, they plug in, and they go, oh, I still sound like me, right? and then they send it back, or you know. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with aspiring to really nice gear. I coveted, where was it? It was there. I coveted that guitar. I also bought $100 guitar just to leave at my girlfriend's house, so that if I'm over there, I can just pick up a guitar and play. And I honestly get almost as much joy out of just playing that guitar, just because I love to play the guitar, right? Now, I only own 3 electric guitars, a bass, and an acoustic. And for someone that does what I do, that is pretty. I mean, I have students that have 50 electric guitars, right? Oh, yeah, now, part of that, though, having chosen this life path, is really just a financial thing. It's like, usually it would be like, I want to upgrade my guitar. I'm going to roll the money from this guitar into a new one, rather than having lots of extras. But I mean, I'd rather have it that way because I'm always playing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, I think it's that, do you use it? And I think as you progress into your career, you know, if you are actually actively playing as a musician, you might get a gig. For example, let's say I get a gig at a restaurant here, and they go, you know, we want a really nice soft kind of background kind of. I'm thinking, well, a nylon string guitar would be a great option for that. Yeah. Right. I'm lucky I have a really nice nylon string guitar. But if I didn't, I would be thinking, well, could that make me thousands of dollars this year doing that gig? Right. That makes sense, right? So I can justify.
No, absolutely. That's like a work expense then, isn't it, really? I mean, you know.
Well, it is, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's just reminding as well people out there that, you know, are doing this, whether it's semi-professional, professional, or, you know, just amateur based, if you like, whatever that is, that if you are making money with your gear, the gear acquisitions, you can write a lot of that stuff off, right? If they're legitimate kind of uses. And for us, because we are legitimately doing that all the time, we can. So, but I've done it. I've bought, you know, the Klon pedals, and
the Klon is a whole thing unto itself, isn't it? Have you seen that pedal movie that Reverb made? It's a documentary about the obsession with pedals, and it's actually really fun because it tells the no affiliation, but it tells the story of you know, how some of these pedals have this mythic status, like the Klon. You know, it's fascinating.
Well, I think it's a great topic because that is part of the G.A.S. thing, isn't it? Okay, so a Klon is what, $7,000,
right?
Or whatever.
Or you could buy a Klon clone for like $200, you know.
Well, yeah, and I've got probably 3 of them here, 3 different ones, and honestly, they still sound like overdrives to me. I could care less. Right. And if you haven't played a real Klon, how do you know? First of all.
True. That's true.
And is it something that you want to sound like?
And it's even if you have played a real Klon, goes back to our thing about earlier. Where are you going to sit in the mix? Like, it always fascinates me when you hear those isolated tracks of people like Ritchie Blackmore and Brian May, and their tone sounds pretty small and thin, but you put it in that mix and it sounds massive, you know, because they're thinking about that, you know.
Well, absolutely. Or the engineer is, and you know, you might be feeding them the biggest sound ever, and they're like narrowing it down and like putting it in its, you know, place in the mix.
And I think Brian May in particular, because he had an engineer's mind, and, you know, and he's a scientist and all that, and of course he made that guitar out of the fireplace. I tried making one out of my mum and dad's chimney, didn't go as well.
It was a bit heavy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it had a lovely sort of smoky tone, but it was a bit heavy. So.
I think it's all of those things, right? We can want this stuff. If it works for you, fantastic. Yeah. But what I've learned over the years is I'll plug something in, and if you're listening to a piece of gear, whether it's an amplifier, you know, a pedal or a guitar, I'm actually listening for the feedback that it's giving me. And if I'm trying to get a certain sound out of an amplifier and it won't give it to me, don't fight that. Just use the sound the amp will give you. Right. I was in Florida a couple of years ago, went into a guitar center down there, and there was a Mark I Boogie, right? Mm-hmm. Had an EV speaker in it, and it was the most amazing sound, right? I was like, oh my God, I want to take this amp home. But it couldn't flipping lift it. It was so heavy.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, well, that would be great in my studio.
Yeah.
But number one, it's going to cost $1,000 to get it home.
Right.
Honestly, am I ever going to use that at a gig, mic it up? No. I mean, I don't know about you, Rob, but I don't want to mic up cabs anymore. I don't want to take an amp to a gig. I'd rather take a little modeler. To me, it sounds amazing through a...
See, I don't. Yeah. That's the first thing we're going to disagree on, folks.
Well, no, but that's great, though. So
I use the modeler for my courses. I use it for some sessions and recording and stuff like that. But rehearsals and gigs, I think it might be using my eyes as well as my ears. But I think the tube amp responds differently. I still feel something there. There's a little bit of, maybe it's the air moving. And I also kind of like that it's slightly unpredictable, which I know it can be a real problem. But, you know, to me, I don't mind the occasional crackle. For me, I feel something from it. And, you know, maybe that's me clinging on to an analog way of life. But I do genuinely feel it. And actually, I have to say, when I've put, you know, the fractal through speakers and tried to recreate that, not quite the same for me. So maybe I don't have the right setup for it, though.
Well, no, and, you know, maybe that's it, and maybe an EQ on the PA or whatever could change those things. Yeah. But an example of that, so years ago, before I was using Helix and modeling, I had two tube amps, right? A Bogner and a divided by a Category 5 amp. Yeah. And I still have both of them. And I played a gig in Hilo, so on the other side of the islands.
I thought you said I played a gig in heels, and I was like, man, that's really difficult to get on those pedals.
I've got a pedal board and two amplifiers.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't enough power to power up my amps. Right. They're browning out. So I'm unplugging pedals and everything that I can take out the signal chain that's taking power.
Yeah.
We couldn't get any of them going.
Oh, dear.
Right, so I had to play through the PA.
Yeah. Which is always, I've done that before when an amp went down. It's a humbling experience.
Yes, it is. And so you've lugged all this stuff there, right? And again, like you say, optimally, that's not going to happen, right? And if you're on a touring circuit, that's not happening. But when you're playing little club gigs and stuff like that, you never know, right? I mean, I've been electrocuted before.
Oh, I have as well, yeah.
I mean, you don't know what you're going to get. So point being, you know, understand what your acquisitions are for. If they serve your purpose, will they make you money? Can you write them off? There's all these things I think should go into your choices of.
Yeah, I guess when I see this title of this question, and I say when I see it, I just wrote it, but when I see it, when it manifested itself out of the sea, the lady of the lake was hot. No, I'll move on. So I saw this. I guess my first thought is, you know, all the hundreds of students over the years that would come back for their lesson and, oh, you've got a new amp. Oh, you've got a new guitar. Look what I picked up over the week. That's great. You know, how's it sound? Yeah, it sounds pretty good. Did you work on what we talked about? Yeah, I got to a little, you know, and it's like somehow between Monday and Monday, you know, Guitar Center or Sweetwater reared its head. And I think when I see this question, I'm not so much thinking about the professionals. I'm thinking more about the sort of the hobbyists or the semi-professionals and where their focus and their time is going. That's how I think of this question.
No, so it's an investment in time and the money. So could you say, well, then, all right, I've got a great little setup, right? I mean, I've got a PV Classic 20 over there.
Oh, I love the PV Classic. It's a great little amp.
It's about the best sounding amp I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's a great little amp.
Right. Okay, love it. So I bought another one. I got a pair of them.
Right.
My point being, if you've got a rig that sounds good for you, could the investment be going towards lessons?
Yeah.
Like, whether that...
What about online courses by Rob Garland and Robbie Calvo? That seems like a good investment, doesn't it?
Links below. Of course, we're kidding, but...
Yeah. Well, I'm not kidding. But
No, I didn't think you were.
Yeah, I wasn't.
No, but...
I've got to buy some more gear.
Exactly, yeah. No, but the acquisition could be focused on something other than what you think might be getting you to be better. What about the investment in time? Play a few notes and really listen to how the notes sound. And I think what happens sometimes is you might be playing a note, but you throw the note away. What about making the note have its full value? Let's say it's a quarter note or a half note or something.
You know who said, be present in every note? It was me. It was me just then.
Just then. No, very good, Rob.
Yeah, thanks.
No, I like
trademark.
Yeah.
No, that is so true though, because it's like there's a tendency, again, we talked about this in technique and things, there's a tendency to rush through a scale or whatever. Are you really listening and feeling? For me, it feels a big part of it as well, and I used to play, when I was a teenager, I used to play in the dark just because I wanted to just get that sensation of how the note really felt. And still to this day, and this is why I believe that, even though some of the choices you make to do this for life can cause conflict and such, when I pick up the guitar and I just hold it next to me, unplugged, whatever, and I just play a note, I feel that same sense of, it's like a spiritual thing. It's connected to the universe. And that's just, I found that very, very early on, and so I think with that in mind, it's one of the reasons why I don't really go down that gear path too much. I mean, yes, I have some amps and all that kind of stuff. Still about that initial feeling and sound, and like you say, really listening to a note and getting the full response of it. And I do think when it comes to that and tone, people forget they have a tone control and a volume control on the guitar, because it makes such a difference, and pickup selections,
It really does.
Our taste in tone changes over the years, right? When the first amp I had was I think it was a PV, but it wasn't a good one like the Classic. It was a shite one, and I would always do that. I would scoop the mids because I was a metal kid, literally made of metal, which was uncomfortable. But I would scoop the mids, get it to sound as much like a buzzing weasel, and it just sounded, I'm sure it sounded bloody awful, but you didn't know any better. That's the point. Right. When you're 14, you don't know any better, or I didn't, right? So, and my guitar was made by a company called G.A.S out of England, and it was £80, the price, not the weight. And it was red, and it had the word Axe in huge letters on it, very subtle. And and the action was so high that when you got above the 12th fret, there was snow.
Laying on the ground.
Yeah, laying on the ground. So, but it was unbelievably difficult to play. But to what you said earlier, there are advantages to that. Now, some people might quit when they try to play guitar like that because it bloody hurt. But 2 years later, once I sort of made peace with it and was making progress, my parents could see that I was taking it seriously, and we upgraded to a Charvette by Charvel, the baby brand. And that thing, the action was lower, it played great. It was like getting in a sports car after driving a Morris Minor.
No, right, yeah. No, absolutely. So I think some of these things, and again, the acquisition that you thought might be amazing, and you're going to keep playing it because it looks cool,
right? Or
everyone else that has one,
yeah.
But it doesn't work for your technique, right?
Right.
So what does the neck feel like? Are your hands small? Like a carny? Or
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So if
are you hanging out with the bearded lady?
Yeah, so if you've got small hands or, thick, chubby, sausage-like fingers or whatever, is that instrument actually working for you? If you've got a lot of hand strength, really low action, your guitar's buzzing all the time, none of these things are working for you.
You don't know these things when you start,
Right.
do you? That's the thing. It takes years to develop these things, and get a sense of what works for you.
You do, and I think that's it, and that's where maturing. So could you say that, gear acquisition is something of a maturity kind of thing, right? You could say, okay, after 10 years of buying all this stuff, you realize that, the MXR and the simple delay pedal that you had into that little amplifier is perfectly fine. It's probably the best thing, because I think sometimes the more stuff you put in your signal chain, the worse your tone gets.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even things like extra little cables makes a difference, what kind of thing.
Huge difference.
And it's funny because with that in mind as well, how many students and friends do you have that have some remorse about selling one piece of gear or two pieces? I often hear people say, I had this one amp, but I sold it. I wish I had that, and it's, so then you ask yourself, what was it in the marketing of the G.A.S that pulled you in and made you go, oh, I got to move to something else now? It's an interesting thought, because a lot of times people are like, yeah, nothing ever sounded as good as that old deluxe or whatever.
No, that's true. And yeah, that's an interesting thing. The marketing has become so good. And what we've probably seen, right, and I've been hired for these things too, is to do a pedal demo, or
I've done it too.
And what I do, with Yamaha, I'm doing product demos and stuff like that, and people go, you could play anything and it would sound good, and I'm like, well, no, probably not. I mean, this piece of gear actually sounds like this, and it sounds really good.
Yeah.
In particular, I'm using the Pacifica Professional right now, and they're Rupert Neve co-designed pickups with Yamaha.
You think they would sound as good if Rupert the Bear developed them?
Probably not. No, Rupert the Bear, no, probably a bit fluffy.
Back in the day, how would you find out that there was a new pedal? You might see an advert. This is pre-internet. You might see an advert in Guitar Player or Guitarist magazine, right? How do you know what it sounds like? You have to hold the magazine up and really strain, right, to really be able to hear what it sounds like. And even then, I don't know if that was a true picture of what it would sound like, right? But now, so we have YouTube, right? And these are professionally edited together demos, right? And there's so many other variables. This is, I think, the issue. When somebody buys a pedal, they get it home, it doesn't quite sound the same way as it did when they saw their favorite player play it on YouTube. There's so many variables, it's like, what's it going through? What's it been edited through? What's the room? What's the amp, and so on.
Well, one of those things as well is like the compression bit rate from YouTube and everything else. And it's
absolutely,
and it's coming through in stereo into your headphones, right, or, this production of whatever it is.
Yes.
Let's say it is a mono setup, but it's coming through in stereo because it's a production video.
Yeah.
And you get it home and it's been narrowed now down to mono through your little amplifier that you've got up against the wall, getting too much bass response. Like you say, there's so many variables to these things. And I always say to people too, let's say you've got a new amplifier and I go, well, where is it in the room?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got it in the corner.
Right.
Sounds too muffled and bassy.
Right.
Move it out of the corner.
Yeah.
Put it in the middle of the room and put it on a crate.
Right.
Or turn it on its side a little bit.
Yeah.
To lift it off so you haven't got that proximity effect.
Yeah. Frequencies, people respond to frequencies differently, right? And that could be a whole inherent how you've grown up, what you've been exposed to, what you've heard. It reminds me of the thing in the Second World War, where the scientists working with the Germans were trying to develop a frequency where they could play it on the battlefield and the Allied soldiers would crap themselves. Which probably my first ever PV is probably getting into that. What one responds to as good tone is subjective. Robbie Calvo and the wrap up.
Hopefully that's a few thoughts from our perspective. And again, comments below if you would, guys. Your thoughts on gear acquisition, anything that you might have bought that you thought was a fantastic purchase, things that you thought maybe weren't, and things that maybe you held on to that ended up being a good purchase.
Let us know if you do sometimes struggle with, you know, this idea of it's easier to go online and watch, you know, gear videos or go on forums or whatever, versus actually maybe, you know, picking up the guitar and playing. And maybe if you're going to talk about that, just give us a bit of insight into where you're at as a player and what your goals are, because that helps put the whole thing into context. So we'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, if you've got any suggestions for future topics, I mean, we've got a whole list of things that we want to go through, but if you guys have some ideas on that as well.
If you have any shoes you think would go with Robbie's cocktail dress, we'd like to know that as well. What color you think?
Yeah, and where I can get them.
If anybody is actually watching this, we'd like to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And don't forget to, like Robbie said, leave a comment, like, subscribe to the YouTube channels. That keeps this stuff going. And yeah, let us know what you'd want to see from us in future. And we'll see you soon.
All right, guys. See ya.